Welcome to Astrology Night here at Soul Food Coffee House in Redmond, Washington. We are here to talk about the astrology of January 2017. And in fact, I'm going to start off, when I get to the astrology stuff in a few minutes, I'm going to start off taking an overview of all of 2017, just kind of from a macro lens, and then we'll obviously take it month by month through the year. Before I jump in, there's two orders of business. The first is my cell phone making noise. We can do this. Before jumping into the astrology, we have two orders of business. The second order kind of borders on astrology. The first is some upcoming dates that I have scheduled in the year ahead. As many of you know, some of you here are attending. Next weekend will be the Brighton Bush weekend, the Brighton Bush Hot Springs, looking at the astrology of the year ahead. And if you're interested in coming to that, tough. It's overbooked where it's sold out. Can't do it. There's one this summer. I'll get to that in a bit. And then there's obviously one next year. India, a week and a half from today, I take off for India. I'll be there for 5 weeks, which is very important for us to note here because next month, January of 2017, Astrology Night will be broadcast from India, which means that I will not be here. I'm working on the Swami trick of bilocation. I don't have it down yet. So I will be in India, but if you stretch the meaning of bilocation, on the last Wednesday of the month, I don't have that date offhand. If someone does, I'll echo it for everyone else. Last Wednesday of the month of January, fine. The 25th is the last Wednesday of the month of January. Thank you, Kevin. What will be happening here on the 25th is that my forecast for February will be shown via the miracles of computer technology and internet. It will not be live since India is 13 and a half hours ahead of us here, and that won't work. But I will not be here next month, just so you know. And I'm getting increasing number of people who listen on the internet who say, I'm going to just show up some month and catch you live. And that's great, but don't do it in January because I won't be here. All right. What is coming up, though, is that on my return from India, instead of flying back to Seattle, I fly to Baltimore, Maryland. And I will be participating in the NCGR conference there called The Many Faces of Astrology. NCGR is a nonprofit organization dedicated to excellence in education of astrologers. And there will be a faculty there of, maybe 30 or 40 speakers. And it will be held at the Hyatt Regency Hotel on the Inner Harbor. For those of you who know Baltimore, it's actually a cool spot in Baltimore. And my lecture there will be entitled Working with Planetary Pairs, like Venus and Mars, or Mars and Uranus, or Jupiter and Saturn. You can find out more information by going on the web to NCGR, that's short for National Council on Geocosmic Research, NCGR Conference 2017, ncgrconference2017.com. All right. End of March, I'll be making a quick run down to the Bay Area and Sacramento, dates and times on those events to follow. In May 6th through the 13th, I will be participating with an awesome group of astrologers at Astrology Rising, Co-Creating the Future, and this will be at the Flamingo Beach Resort and Spa on the beach, a beautiful resort hotel in Guanacaste, Costa Rica. And this is being put on by my buddy Tom Lesher. Some of you know the Pele Report, Kai Pacha. And Kai Pacha and Maurice Fernandez and Sal Janassen from Norway, Julia Simas from Australia, several astrologers from the United States, Mona Valenis from Spain. It's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be a lot of interactive astrodrama. One night I am leading a group of astrodrama. What this is we will have a chart the size of this room mapped off on the floor. And I will have chosen people to play each of the planets in Kai Pacha's chart. And we will be doing an astrodrama of Kai Pacha, who will be standing in the middle of his chart, interacting with the planets around him, who are interacting amongst themselves with my coaching. And I've done this enough to know that if you pick the right people, you stop coaching because they take on a life of their own. It's a very fascinating thing. All right, that'll be May 6th through the 13th. And you can find out more on that by going to Astrology Rising Costa Rica, all one word, .com. And then we have the last weekend in May, NORWAC, the Northwest Astrology Conference, an annual conference here in Seattle. It's many of us astrologers' favorite of the regional or smaller, it's not even that small, 300-400 people or so. There's a stellar faculty. I'm not speaking at it this year, but I will be there. I've spoken at, 20 of the last 25, and it's like a farmer, has to, let a field go fallow every now and then. It's my year off, and that's wonderful. I just get to go and enjoy it. But there will be people there like Brian Clark from Australia, Stephen Forrest, Rob Hand, Demetra George, Mark Jones from the UK, Jessica Lanyadu, awesome astrologer, Lauren Albandian, Melanie Reinhart, the woman who wrote the Chiron book, will be here from the UK, Philip Sedgwick, Samuel Reynolds, Gloria Starr, Patricia Wall. I mean, it's a stellar crew. And so mark your calendar. If you can't make it to Costa Rica, at least hopefully I will see you at NORWAC. Second week of June, June 8th through the 10th, I'll be up in Vancouver, and details of that event will follow. But if you're in the Vancouver area, make a note, and I'll be there, sponsored by the Vancouver Guild of Astrologers. And then, last item on this list is Brighton Bush Summer Retreat. So if you have not registered and can't make it for the one next weekend, the summer retreat is a lot different. Brighton Bush, obviously, in the summertime, the hot tubs and the outside, the old growth forest is very different to experience in midsummer. And this will be July 30th through August 2nd. I'll say more about this over the next months. But this will be like a little mini version of my India retreat, and this will be an initiation to spiritual astrology. Again, not just me lecturing and talking, but more interactive stuff and a real experience. So put that on your calendars now, and I'm sure that will fill up also. But that's at the end of July. Okay. That's one of two things. So you know more about my future than I know, because as soon as I turn this piece of paper over, I forget about it all until it's like, oh my God, I forgot to make reservations. Okay. Speaking of which, how's Mercury retrograde treating everybody? We'll get there. I've had some Mercury retrograde experiences this week. All right. The next thing I want to talk about really kind of gets into astrology, but it's not about specific astrological events. This has been an ongoing theme, and it's been an ongoing theme for the last few months in these monthly talks. And I don't know how to do this without doing the double negative. I can't not address it. I'm an Aries. So, when stuff happens, it's like there's a part of me that wants to engage it directly head on and speak about it. And this involves the political scenario that's going on in Washington, D.C., around the world. And I have to say that the hundreds of comments on the YouTube, and I should say thank you to all of you out there in YouTube land and internet land. It's been tremendously gratifying to see tens of thousands of people tuning into Soul Food and our little monthly discussions here. It's very cool. Thank you all for your support and for passing this along to your friends, whether they be real ones or imaginary ones. But I've gotten hundreds of comments over the past months, and I have to say that they've been favorable, probably 8 or 9 to 1. So if this was just if democracy ruled what I did, well, I would continue doing what I've been doing. But it doesn't. And I will still continue doing what I'm doing. But I'd like to just address those people who find my monthly talks incredibly offensive, narrow-minded, stupid, ill-informed, biased, judgmental, and the list can go on and on and on and on. And there are serious people who I'm sure have serious points of view who feel that way every time I say anything about the political scene. And I have to say this again, and I've said it before, and that is that one of the things that we have of value in this country is that we can have very different political perceptions, views, and opinions and still get along. Which leads me to if you post something on my, there's a little bit of possession there. If you post something on my YouTube page, I don't care if you disagree with me, as long as you're not mean or offensive or hostile to everyone else. Now, I've even had this on my solstice poem that some of you see that poem, I posted it also on YouTube. You can find the link from my Facebook page or just going to the YouTube channel. But there were some references in a parody that was, towards the night before Christmas modeled, where I referenced Trump. And there were people who were even all over me for that because of my negativity and my judgment. But it was a parody. What does one expect? I don't want to get lost in this point, but a couple of things. If what I am saying to you is so offensive, you have the freedom of choice to listen to something else. I mean, that's the first thing. Number two, if you like most of what I say enough that you keep coming back, thank you. I appreciate that. You can have a difference of opinion. Look, there have been other presidents who have been elected that were frightening to me. I dealt with it. We do what we need to do. That's part of the beauty of this country, as long as it continues to have freedom of speech and recognition and acknowledgement of people that are different than we are. I have to say that I got a long comment just yesterday from someone saying, I hope someday you are judged as negatively as you are judging Trump. I hope someone doesn't give you a chance. And all I can say is that he is the president, or he will be soon. Get over whatever the level of denial you have, we have. He is our president. Or he will be our president. But that doesn't mean that I need to support his individual political decisions. I don't understand. Everything that Trump does breaks new ground. There's no, it's not that he's breaking rules, although he may be. That'll come out. I'm not going to prejudge that. But he's certainly breaking tradition to appoint people to. It's almost like even the appointments that he's made so far to the cabinet and to the higher echelon of government have all been like how ridiculous can they be based upon what they're choosing? Pick the person who says, I want to destroy this agency and make him in charge of that agency. Pick the person who is, absolutely intent on, trashing the environment and make him in charge of the environment. Now, again, these are individual political, opinions. But those are the opinions that I have, and I can't not say it, and I will be back there again and again and again. I certainly am willing to support the institution of the president, but that does not mean that I am willing to support political views and or judgments against classes of society, whether they are people who smoke marijuana or whether they are people who choose to live their lives sexually different than Mr. Pence, or people who value the environment over corporate profits, or. The list goes on. Anyhow, for those of you who are absolutely pissed off, and I'm going to get the comments, I'll leave your negative comments up there, as long as you say them nicely. Okay, can we go on now? I'm sorry for thank you for indulging me in that, but it's so important for me to keep coming back. I mean, I can't tell you how many people have said, you're an astrologer. Get over this point of view stuff and just tell us what the astrology is. It's like, no, I'm a human being who looks at connecting my experiences to the cosmos. That's what I do. If you don't like what I do, find someone who pretends that they're objective. I mean, I can't tell you how many astrologers that I've encountered over the past year who said that, Hillary Clinton would win the election and Donald Trump didn't have a chance because they were Hillary Clinton fans and anti-Donald Trump. It's like, but would deny that was the reason that they said that. Now, granted, there are those who have predicted that and say, well, he did win the popular election. And there are those Trump followers who believe that those statistics, like all other statistics, are faked. Can't go there. All right, I said I wasn't going to go in deeper. I just keep recycling on this. I apologize. I really do. Astrology. God. Who could have made this up? I mean, who could have possibly made this up this way? We are definitely in what the Chinese proverb or curse, may you live in interesting times. We are definitely here. And it's not just the United States. It's Great Britain, it's France, it's Austria, it's the Soviet Union, it's Russia. What Soviet Union? I just had a flashback moment. It's Australia. It's all over the world. And I think part of what's going on and part of what the astrology is for next year is really about the fear that we are facing when we see that things are not they are not the same. We are like Dorothy who wants to go home to Kansas, and Kansas don't exist anymore. Well, it does. It does exist. And there are those people who are doing their best to make sure that we do not let Kansas go. And when I say Kansas, I don't mean the state of Kansas. I mean the state of mind. But we're definitely treading new ground, and I want to talk about the astrology of this, the astrology of now, and pick apart some of the main pieces of both next month and next year. First of all, when I look at the astrology of 2017, I'm struck by the fact that there are no outer planet transits. When I say outer planets, I mean because Jupiter and Saturn are kind of outer planets already. But when you go out to the invisible ones, what we astrologers call the transpersonal planets, the Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, there are no transits that involve Uranus to Neptune, Uranus to Pluto, or Neptune to Pluto. These are the deepest, slowest moving, outermost transits. And in fact, we are coming out of a several-year period that you've probably heard me rant on for 5 years too many, of Uranus, the planet of revolution, shock, surprise, squaring Pluto, the planet of evolution and transformation and metamorphosis. This square, this dynamic square between these two outermost heavyweight planets that has been going on from 2010 through 2015 is now past. Although, and you've heard me say this before, the effects are not past, and we'll come back to that because they're certainly kicking up a storm now, January and February, and will continue to. But the major events of these outer planets are past. And what this really tells me is that we have a whole lot of integration, personal assimilation, reaction, and working with stuff that has already gone down. Got it? And it doesn't mean that there won't be anything new. And in fact, there are some very specific aspects that really do signify new things, one of which is occurring now as we speak. Aside from the new moon, I should come back to that in a few minutes, because even though this is technically a January 2017 forecast, this may be the only time that I recall an astrology night falling within a few hours of the new moon. The new moon is tonight here on the West Coast, and early tomorrow morning, 1:50, I think. It's maybe 11 o'clock-ish or 10:30-ish here on the West Coast. And we'll talk about that new moon in a bit. Actually, we just put it up there. That's close enough. That's tomorrow. But if we come back to... All right, let's do this. There we go. So this is the new moon that's very late tonight. And that would be, here in Seattle, would be December 28th. It would be nearly 2 a.m. on the East Coast of the United States. Okay. But the other aspect that is very, very close right now was exact just a couple of days ago. I thought I had the date. I think it was on the 26th or 27th. And that is Jupiter at 20 degrees, actually 20 degrees, it shows here 51 minutes, and Uranus at 20 degrees, 33 minutes. They're at less than a half a degree of being exactly opposed. And this is a significant transit that is really about being thrust into the future. Because Uranus is the planet, remember we were talking about earlier about the Uranus square Pluto. So Uranus is the shock and the awe and the futuristic side of what's going on. And now Uranus is being opposed by Jupiter, and Jupiter is the magnifying lens. Jupiter is the bigger, better, more, too much. Jupiter is the amplifier. Jupiter's the only planet that gives off more radiation than it receives. It's like a radio star. And in fact, it could almost be said that Jupiter is a star that didn't quite reach critical mass. And it's almost like, from a distance, it's almost like our solar system might be seen as a binary system, with Jupiter as a star that transmits radio waves but not visible light. And it has as many satellites more than the sun has planets. So it definitely is an interesting thing. So Jupiter is opposite Uranus. And we see this culturally, historically, over and over again, this Jupiter-Uranus cycle as a cycle of technological breakthrough. It's new. Uranus is new. It's futuristic. Jupiter kind of brings things into awareness and makes them even more. And as an opposition, there's somewhat of things coming to fruition. And so we look at this cycle, and we're in it now because the Jupiter-Uranus opposition, I do have the date, was exact on Christmas Day, actually Boxing Day, on the 26th. And because of the retrograde motions, it will be exactly in opposition again in March of 2017, and then for the third and final time, the end of September. So this is one of the major background notes of this whole year. We may not like the future that we see, but it's certainly different, which is what Uranus does. Uranus is polarity. It flips the polarity. Uranus basically releases built-up tension. One of the things that I teach regularly, I've just recently at a conference did a lecture entitled Everything You Want to Know About Uranus But We're Afraid to Ask. And what I said was that Uranus really only has one job. Uranus's job is the instantaneous resolution of irresolvable opposites. How can that be? Well, there's communication that occurs that settles things down, but there's communication that occurs that just makes things worse. The more you talk about it, the greater the tension is, and you just shut up. All right. So when air masses meet and they try to communicate a warm, wet air mass with a cold, dry air mass, the more they rub up against each other like static electricity, the greater the charge becomes until... I love it when some of you jump. You're supposed to. Uranus is sudden. Uranus is lightning. It's sudden change. It's immediate. And it instantaneously resolves those tensions which had no solution, no resolution. So we have Uranus opposite Jupiter, which is kind of looking at the big picture and not seeing the details. And that can be tremendous for visionary work, but the vision isn't necessarily good or bad. It just brings things up that were buried or hidden. And again, coming back to the Trump phenomenon, whether you like it or not, there are many, many people who voted for Trump because they were as disgusted by what was going on in Washington, D.C., as the people who were voting for or would have voted for a Bernie or someone else. And so we have to be careful about lumping people together, but still what's happening here with this Uranus, with this Jupiter-opposed Uranus, is the tension that has been under the surface is out in the open. And it's not fun to see the tension that's now out in the open, but at least it can be processed. At least it can be dealt with. At least it's out in the open. So for all the negativity that I have about what's going on globally, politically, the positive side of this is that we have our curriculum. And that's what 2017 is this curriculum is now in front of us. Fortunately, we have another player in this curriculum because although the Jupiter-opposed Uranus is very strong, and it's even still making a square, it's 4 degrees away and it's waning, but make no mistake, Pluto is still involved in this. And as the littler, faster-moving planets move through the points on these squares, they reactivate the deeper energy that goes all the way back to the Fukushima earthquake meltdown, tsunami, Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, Occupy everything. That was the opening volley of this Uranus-Pluto square period, and it ain't over. Because when we get planets that move through these points over the next weeks, the beginning of January, we will have not only this new moon in Capricorn tonight, but we'll have the sun moving across Pluto, squaring Uranus and squaring Jupiter, and so this stuff is going to be reactivated again. Then it will be followed by Mercury after Mercury does its retrograde dance. And then later on, it'll be followed by Venus and Mars as they move through Aries, squaring Pluto, opposing Jupiter, and conjuncting Uranus. Do you see where I'm going here? So even though there's no outer planet, far outer planet, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, drama, there's still drama that involves it because it reactivates, re-stimulates, something. What's another word? Rehash. Reinvigorates. Reignite. Ooh, especially in February when Mars comes through here. When that Mars hits that Uranus, we'll talk about that next month. I'm not a negative person when it comes to forecasting the future, but there are some pretty stressful moments that we still have in front of us, and so we have to be careful when we're looking at the month ahead. Let's bring it back now to January of 2017. When I ran the transits for January of 2017, the first thing I noticed was that not only were there no outer planet transits, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, to each other, as there aren't throughout the whole year, but there weren't even any Jupiter or Saturn transits. In other words, the transit list of what planets are hitting what planets in January were all lunar, solar, Mercury, Venus, or Mars. This is what I sometimes refer to the transits of those planets as my version of the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day our daily noise. Because these faster moving planets act like triggers. They don't make the main event. But if the main event has been being set up for 3 or 4 or 5 years or 300 years, one right trigger can really initiate something big. Think of how World War I started. Not that I'm saying that we're looking at a world war. Or maybe we're in one. I don't know. But it was one event that basically triggered a series of declarations of war in August of 1914 that basically started a worldwide war. And so the faster moving planets, the moon, the sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, even though they're just noise, they can trigger very important events. And this month, January, these planets are pretty darn active. All right, I'm bouncing back and forth. I want to go back to the 2017 overview because one of the pieces is this Jupiter opposition to Uranus that I just talked about. The other piece is the role that Saturn plays in this. And this is a very sweet piece. It's not like I can't respect Saturn. I have to because I don't have a choice. Saturn basically says, stand still, this is going to hurt. And you say, thank you. I mean, it's like fighting Saturn is just setting it up to be even worse. So we do what we need to do in order to embrace the energy and to learn from it. And I was explaining Saturn to a client the other day, and I said, those things, because this person was in the process of a really difficult Saturn transition. And I said to him, the thing about Saturn is that when we're going through Saturn transitions, when someone says, how you doing? You basically go, it sucks. This is absolutely bleh. But those same periods of time of those yucky, difficult, painful Saturnian transits, we look back at a year later or 20 years later when we don't have that pain anymore, and we go, that summer was not an easy summer, but it's the best thing that ever happened to me. There's an old story that Ram Dass used to tell, I think it's as part of a Zen teaching, that this Zen master in an old Chinese village, his son goes off hunting, and doesn't come back, and all the villagers come to him and go, "This is terrible. Something's happened to your son. This is awful." And the Zen master responded, "Good news, bad news, who's to know?" And a couple of days later, his son comes back with 2 wild stallions that he's captured. And the villagers all come around and go, "Wow, you're the richest person in the village now. This is amazing. Your luck is incredible." And he goes, "Good news, bad news, who's to know?" A few days later, his son is breaking one of the stallions in, gets thrown, and breaks his leg. And it's springtime, and his son is now not able to help in the planting. And all the villagers come around and go, "Oh, your luck is so awful. What's just happened is terrible, and we're so sorry." And the Zen master said, "Good news, bad news, who's to know?" And a few days later, the king's army comes through conscribing all the young eligible men, and his son, obvious. But you understand this? This is the way planetary transits are. In the moment, things are not as they appear to be from a perspective, from a distance, whether it's loss of a job or a personal illness, or the end of a relationship or the beginning of a relationship. Things transform into their opposite. I think the philosopher who wrote about that extensively was Friedrich Nietzsche, and he talked about how the things that become the most important actually have to break down and go to the bottom of the heap and change. So, which is actually Pluto's job, by the way. It's that deconstruction, reconstruction, the death, rebirth process. All right, so Saturn, who's normally a pain in the whatever part of the personal anatomy may be hurting, Saturn moving through Sagittarius, and I read something today, gosh, I want to give credit because it was such a good image. Melanie Reinhardt, who's doing a talk at NORWAC next spring. And she referred to Saturn in Sagittarius as the broken arrow. You get it? Because Sagittarius is just Latin for archer. It's the archer aiming the arrow into the sky, the arrow of intention, off to the horizon, out into the distance, the moving beyond the current situation. And yet Saturn is basically what holds you back. It's the blockages. And so we have Saturn in Sagittarius for a couple of years. By the way, it moves in, it dips its toes into Capricorn the end of 2017 in December. So a year from now, before Christmas, we will be done with Saturn in Sagittarius, and it will be moving into Capricorn. But now in Saturn in Sagittarius is harmonizing, making a trine with Uranus. Remember, Uranus has been under siege by Pluto. None of the planets mess with Pluto. Pluto's the heaviest weight, even though it's small. It shows the intensity. It shows that planetarily size doesn't matter, because Pluto is basically the slowest moving of the normally considered planets, and yet Saturn now harmonizing with Uranus. And the first round on this was also about a week ago. And I talked about this Jupiter opposition to Uranus and Saturn trining Uranus. I talked about that in last month's talk, December. And if any of you are watching this online, the December talk is still on the YouTube channel. You can find it if you're so inclined. But this Saturn this Saturn trine Uranus, which was exact for the first of 3 hits on Christmas Eve, will hit the second time in mid-May coming up, 2017, and then the third and final time the first part of November. November 11th is the actual date. But these are slow-moving transits that have impact for weeks coming and going. So what does Saturn trine Uranus mean? Uranus is shock and surprise and upheaval and awesome and oh my God and rock and roll and unexpected. I love the line. Every astrologer has used this at some point in time. Oh, it's a Uranus transit. Expect the unexpected. And how does one do that? It's unexpected. You can't expect it. It's like knowing that lightning is going to strike, but you don't know when it's going to hit or where it's going to hit. So, we have Uranus, the planet of the unexpected instantaneous resolution of irresolvable opposites, being supported by persistent, enduring, stabilizing, hardworking, taskmaster Saturn, who says you need to follow through and do the work. And that Saturn is not only trining to Uranus, but it's also being sextiled by Jupiter. Jupiter's the faster moving of these three planets. Jupiter moves faster than Saturn, which moves faster than Uranus. And so we have this little triangle here involving the Uranus, which involves Jupiter moving in and out of the opposition to Uranus, Jupiter moving in and out of the sextile to Saturn, but Saturn's moving a little a little quicker than Uranus, and so the timing here is skewed, but behind that we have the heavy weight of this particular aspect, and so we have the Jupiter kind of making the sextile with Saturn at the same time, and what this does is it gives us a way to work with this dynamic upheaval of awareness. Uranus is sometimes called the Great Awakener. Rick Tarnas, an associate of mine, very brilliant man who wrote a book called Cosmos and Psyche, which is a brilliant historical book about astrology and the long cycles of history. He's the co-director of the PhD program in consciousness studies at CIIS. Very smart man. Wrote a book called, I can't remember the title. I'm not as smart as he is. But it's Prometheus, the Great Awakener. And his claim or his hypothesis or theory is that we misnamed Uranus and that Uranus is much more functions like Prometheus, who basically was the bringer of technology, stole fire from the gods and gave it to the humans. And so we have Uranus acting in this kind of sudden, out-of-the-box, revolutionary, shocking manner that's being magnified by Jupiter, and yet Saturn, all through 2017, is stabilizing this, saying the game isn't about what's going on now, it's about the long-term ramifications. Also, Jupiter, as it's moving through all of this, direct, retrograde, direct, is also making a square to the slowest moving Pluto. And so it's Jupiter's opposition to Uranus and square to Pluto that is reactivating the changes that were brought up from this Uranus-Pluto square, which are precedented by the changes of the Uranus-Pluto opposition in the mid-late 60s. And we're talking here sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, we're talking cultural change, civil rights, gender issues, ecology issues, rights of personal consciousness issues, use of drugs medically or herbs for healing or for consciousness expansion. All these issues that were brought up in the 60s never went away, but they came back in spades during the last few years of the Uranus-Pluto square. And now as Jupiter moves through there again, as Jupiter activates the square to Pluto and the opposition to Uranus, and we talked about the dates of the opposition to Uranus being Christmas, Boxing Day, 12/26, beginning of March, and the end of September 2017. The Jupiter square Pluto was closer to Thanksgiving on its first hit, the end of March on its second hit, and the beginning of August on its third hit. And this is a dynamic piece of the changes that will be going on through next year. One last thing about 2017, and that is Jupiter, which is in Libra, creating this whole idea of relationship. The awareness that comes when we learn. Jupiter is about learning, when we expand our awareness or our consciousness to engage the opposite point of view. This is part of what the political dance is going to be, I think, during this year, is the realization that the people who voted for Trump and preemptively hate the liberals, and the liberals, I'm using labels maybe I shouldn't use, but the liberals and progressives who either wanted to vote for Bernie Sanders and voted for Hillary Clinton or someone else, hate the Trump camp, that those people, while Jupiter is moving through Libra, the gift of this is going to be the realization that we're all being screwed at the same time. That it's not about who won the election. Because whoever won the election, it would have been the same. It's just perhaps that with Trump winning, it's more polarized and more obvious. This is my take. I've slipped back into the political thing again, but I can't separate what's going on astrologically from that because these are such powerful times. And I really do believe that Jupiter's movement through Libra, that the lesson is to open awareness and find common ground rather than to close awareness and to make judgments that won't help anything in the long run. We're all in this together. There is no us and them. Us and them is an illusion. And us and them is an illusion that's propagated by a them, by a real them, who has taken power and propagated this idea of us and them, whether the us and them is male and female, black and white, Latin, Mexican, Muslim, Christian, Jew, male, female, gay, straight, rural, urban, red, blue. I don't care what the opposites are. All of those opposites are being propagated so that the people who are in power can keep the division going so that they can stay in power. And again, that's my hit on this. And I think that the Jupiter in Libra gives us a way out. So I think that 2017 is a very dynamic year, even though there's no transpersonal planetary action. The fact of the matter is we have our curriculum set for us, and we have plenty of work to do. And those of you or those of us who choose to do the work out there on the social front, bless you. But without doing the work on the individual front, the work on the social front will just fall flat, because ultimately, as Jung said, the salvation of the world depends upon the salvation of the individuals within it. This mirrors the idea of Mahayana Buddhism that basically says no one gets enlightened until everyone gets enlightened. In other words, we're on this wheel together. Half of us can't get off the wheel with the other half still holding it in place. So I am you as you are me, as we are all together. Goo goo gajoob. All right. So I've probably burned through most of my time. Let's touch base on January. Now, the good news is that there's no big one thing to talk about in January, except there's no big one thing. That there's lots of noise. But some of that noise is very significant, and it has to do with the Jupiter opposite Uranus and planets moving through and activating the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, Uranus, even Chiron. You see how they're all clustered at 16 to Pluto's almost 17, 20, 21 degrees. And so there's a hum here that's going on from these heavyweight planets, even though they're not exact. As the little planets move in and out of them, the whole circuit goes bzzz, bzzz, bzzz. And every time it does, the big events get reactivated again and again and again. And so these big events that have been set up ain't going away. All right. So let's look at January and talk about some of the changes. First of all, we have a couple of planetary changes, sign changes. On January 2nd, let's change this to 12 p.m. And we'll move this by a day at a time. And let's go here to January 2nd, and watch Venus. Venus is here. Got it? From the 2nd to the 3rd, Venus changes signs from Aquarius, where it is now, into Pisces. And this happens on the 2nd. Let me just do this very succinctly. Venus is a bit of a fish out of water in Aquarius. Oh, she can be friendly, she can be cool, she can be electrically exciting, but she's not at home. When she gets to Pisces, there's like a wetness, there's a smushiness, there's a compassion, and Venus is said to be exalted, meaning that the ancients said Venus likes being in Pisces better than any other sign except for her home signs of Taurus and Libra. So we have Venus moving into Pisces, which starts the year off. Oh, and even backing up a day, although it technically occurs on New Year's Eve day, depending on where you are. I draw your attention here to Mars, who's not having a whole lot of fun in Pisces because he's drunk. Mars doesn't know where he's going. You know, he's all excited about the spiritual whatever. He's like, he's hot to trot. I might have said this last month, because I think I ended the month with talking about the Mars-Neptune. But Mars and Neptune is like being all dressed up and having an invitation to a party that doesn't have an address. You got the energy, but you don't know where to direct it. So what could be more confusing than that? Well, having Mars and Pisces line up with Neptune, the planet of what the fuck? Neptune is the confusing planet. Okay, Neptune is dreamy and imaginative and romantic and spiritual, but you can't touch or taste or Neptune is elusive and illusory. Interesting. And as Mars lines up with Neptune on New Year's Eve, we need to be careful. Not only about little things like practical things like drinking and driving, but about putting too many dreams that are unreal in thinking that they're real. I mean, Mars lined up with Neptune can be magical. I mean, it really can be. But this is kind of the orientation of the year. We might think it's one thing, and it might just end up being something else. And then Venus joins the crowd on the 2nd into the 3rd. And so for a little bit of time here, we have a real celestial traffic jam of Venus, the North Node, Neptune, Mars, the Sun, and Chiron. Whoop, that's the Moon and Chiron, all clustered in Pisces, which is amazing for increasing one's dreams and imagination. We do, however, have the Mercury having Mercury retrograde, and we really didn't talk much about Mercury retrograde, but remember, Mercury turned retrograde a few days before Christmas on the 19th, and it turns direct on January 8th. And it's in Capricorn, but it's backing up into Sagittarius, and it just touches into Sagittarius on January 4th. It turns direct in Sagittarius on the 8th, and then it moves back into Capricorn on the 12th. So we have about a week of remedial, everything is cool. Mercury is in Sagittarius, and there's good news all the way around. And then it goes back into Capricorn and goes, shit, I got to deal with the reality of this. So, point being that with all these planets in Pisces, we do have some reality going on with Mercury, the Sun, and Pluto in realistic, calculating, ambitious Capricorn. And what happens is that over the first week of January, I want you to keep your eyes on the Sun as it, day by day, there's the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, and you see how the Sun catches up with and flips to the other side of Pluto? You with me here? So what this means is that the Sun moves faster than all the outer planets, than all the planets. So the Sun catches up with the planets. Once a year, the Sun will line up with Pluto. And the Sun lines up with Pluto exactly on the evening of January 6th, so the 6th or the 7th, depending upon what time zone you're in. This is a very powerful thing because Pluto, the lord of the underworld, the unconscious, dredges stuff from the very bottom, from the lowest chakra, the survival instinct, and it brings its power stuff that it comes up to the surface. But here's the deal, that the Sun lines up with Pluto, but then what's going to happen over the next couple of days is that it's going to square Uranus, square Jupiter, and sextile Chiron, all within a few days. So this beginning of January, the Sun conjuncts Pluto on January 6th. Mercury turns direct on the 8th. It'll take a day or two for us to feel like things are moving again. On the 10th, the Sun exactly squares Uranus. Sun 20 degrees squaring Uranus. And by the... Where did I go here? Oh, there it is. And by the following day, the Sun is exactly squaring, by the 11th, 12th, the Sun is squaring Jupiter. So do you see what happens as the Sun moves through here? The Sun conjuncts Pluto, squares Uranus, squares Jupiter, and also in the middle of all this, we have a nasty full moon. It's one of the toughest full moons I've seen in a while, because this full moon, let me back this up just a few hours. So this full moon is basically 1 point on a grand square, the moon opposite the Sun, while Jupiter is opposite Uranus, and these two oppositions, Jupiter, Uranus, Sun, Moon, are 90 degrees apart. Squares in astrology are dynamic, unstable, conflictive, and creative. This is not bad. It's just a lot of energy to work with. And we can make tremendous breakthroughs here. But we have to do it with awareness and consciousness because there's a lot of stress. We also do have some relief with Mars in Pisces forming supportive sextile with the Sun, and actually with Pluto and the Sun, and the Moon making a sextile with that also. So there is some support. But the fact of the matter is that this is a pretty intense full moon, and over the days ahead, we get that square activated again. Okay, so here it is with the Sun squaring, the Sun conjuncting Pluto, squaring Uranus, and squaring Jupiter. And then by the end of the month, I'm going to just jump ahead here so you can see it. Mercury has retrograded back into Sag. It turns direct. Watch that Mercury. Just keep your eyes here on... Oh, we're going an hour at a time. That'll take forever. All right, so watch that Mercury moving direct now, and watch as it catches up to Pluto. And you can see here by the end of the month that Mercury is now moving through the exact same thing, starting on the 27th of January, 28th, 29th, Mercury catches up to Pluto, and then over the next couple of days, it will then square Uranus and then square Jupiter. So you see how this is activated again and again? And then in February, Venus and Mars do the same thing back down here with Uranus. So I want to pull all this together into a sense of this dynamic change that's going on. It ain't over yet. And we're going to get a heightened wave of this the first week and a half or so of January, in particular from the 6th through the full moon on the 12th. Then on the 12th, we also have on that full moon one other saving grace, and that is that Venus catches up to Neptune. Remember the Mars-Neptune thing on New Year's Eve? Well, now Venus is lined up with Neptune, and this can be, everything is beautiful. It's romantic. It's the idea that imagination is more important than reality. And it may be, as long as we keep a perspective on which is which, because as my friend Caroline Casey says, wonderful astrologer, visionary activist is what she calls herself, what she says is, imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. Or William Blake, and I know I've said this here before, these are some of my favorite concept quotes. William Blake in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell wrote, what is now proved was once only imagined. And so with this Venus lining up with Neptune, we have the chance to imagine things as we want them to be, but it's important that we just keep the reality check flowing. So that's all part of the full moon. Then by the 16th, Mars catches up with Chiron. We could have a long talk about that. We don't often talk enough about Chiron. But Chiron, as the wounded healer, is that part of each and every one of us humans that fall short of being divine. We all got it. It's the parts of our lives individually that all the great sex, drugs, rock and roll, therapy, yoga, meditation, whatever, won't fix. It's still, I remember Ram Dass saying, I've been doing, yoga, meditation, therapy, psychedelics for like 40 years. And there isn't one neurosis that I had at age 19 that I don't still have at age 70. Except now they're manageable. It used to be overwhelming. They used to knock my life apart for weeks, months at a time. Now it's like, oh, my old friend. Haven't seen you for a while. Come on in. So Chiron is the hurt and the pain and the shortcomings that we have as humans. And when Mars runs into Chiron, we may have a day or two where we have doubt, self-doubt, or we have fear about taking an action because of something that happened in the past when we took a similar action, even though one event doesn't have to do with the other. And that Mars conjunct Chiron is on the 16th. Then Mars moves on, and as it passes Chiron by the 19th, when it reaches 23 degrees, it squares Saturn. Now, Mars square Saturn is a tough nut. This is just a few days long. We're not long-lasting. But again, this is grist for the mill. Because Saturn basically says you can't. Saturn is the wall. Saturn is authority establishing the rules. Mars, on the other hand, is the gas pedal. Saturn's the brake. Mars is the I can do anything. Saturn's like, yeah, you think so. Mars says yes. Saturn says not yet or no. Mars basically is impulsive. Saturn is better get a plan before you impulsively do anything. Mars is spontaneous. Saturn is calculating. So this frustration of the hot, cold, yes, no, do it, don't do it, Mars, Saturn is exact on January 19th. But just a few hours, a few hours later, on the 19th, the Sun slips from Capricorn into Aquarius. Got that? You see that Sun moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. And although Capricorn and Aquarius are both Saturn ruled traditionally, in modern astrology, we've taken Uranus and lumped it over onto Aquarius. But the deal is that there's two ways to deal with Saturn. One is, that's the rule, I'm never going to break it. There's a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit. I will always drive at 59 miles an hour. But then there's I got the rule, but one can actually break rules with intelligence at the right time and do amazing things. I can become a professional race car driver. There's still that rule, but now I've moved beyond it. And in traditional astrology, Saturn was not only the rule maker, but was also the scientist, because the scientist knows the rules and knows how to work with them. And so as the sun moves from restrictive, ambitious, masterful Aquarius, masterful Capricorn into Aquarius, there's this kind of conceptual breakthrough of feeling free. It's not really freedom, but there's an independence from the restriction because you know how to work with them. That's on the 19th. Aquarius, I've said from this stage many times, Aquarius is arguably the weirdest sign of the zodiac. It's an air sign, but it's the water bearer. And what this really means is that air carries moisture. And without moisture in the air, there's no movement of electricity. You know, anyone ever lived in landlocked central Canada or northern Minnesota? In the wintertime, you can't touch someone without going the spark. Every light switch you touch, everything, because there's no conductivity of the electricity, because electricity takes moisture in order to flow. And so the energy builds up, and then Uranianly you get the little lightning, the spark. But here's the interesting thing, because as above, so below, as on the outside, so on the inside. And the nervous system is Aquarian. Why? Because the nervous system is electrical impulses that require a sodium-potassium action in order for the electrical impulse to flow. And you can have all the sodium and all the potassium in the world, but unless it's wet, nothing gonna happen. You need moisture for electricity to flow in order to make the sodium-potassium react. So Aquarius is the water bearer. It's the conceptual breakthrough. It's the lightning striking. It's the awareness. It's the social structure. It's not the individual thought. It's the entire nervous system. And so as the sun moves into Aquarius, it's the middle of winter, but something happens and we begin to look off into the distance because the days are getting longer here in the northern hemisphere, and we're beginning to think, wow, spring is near. It's cold as a... Well, in some places, maybe, we're spoiled here in Seattle because, cold means 31 degrees Fahrenheit, or -1 Celsius. Whereas, I lived in Minnesota for many years. There were these January days when it was actually, 35 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, cold. And yet the sun was up and it felt like it was going to be warm, like spring was on the way. See, Aquarius is the sign of paradox. It's the sign of weird. It's the sign of quirky. And when the sun moves into Aquarius, we begin to kind of pull ourselves out of the heaviness of the Capricorn into the potential of what's going to occur. And of course, this is also the day before Inauguration Day. And no, I'm not slipping back into politics, but we do have an inauguration with the sun, as we always do, in futuristic Aquarius, and the moon in Scorpio. So there's stuff going on. There's that intensity behind the scenes. I don't want to get into this particular chart right now, but that's the 19th, 20th. I want to skip ahead to January 27th, and I want to keep our eye on Venus here, because Venus catches up with Chiron like Mars was earlier in the month on the 25th, 24th, Venus conjuncts Chiron. And again, our emotional wounds can get in the way of our flowing feelings. There's a sense of bumping into a hurt or a pain, which may or may not be in the moment, but it's something that we need to process and to deal with and to work with. By the 27th, that Venus squares Saturn, and Venus squaring Saturn isn't necessarily fun. Remember Mars squaring Saturn? Gas, brake, brake, gas, brake, frustration, hot, cold, yes, no, do it, don't do it. Well, with Venus and Saturn, Venus is warm and sweet and accommodating and pleasurable. And Saturn's saying, don't you dare. Saturn it reminds me of another William Blake poem that I wish I could recite off the top of my head, but it's called The Garden of Love. And Blake describes, I went to this Garden of Love, a place where when I was a child, it was all beautiful and green, and we played out on the green, and the flowers bloomed. And now when I go to the Garden of Love, there's a sign over the door that's over the gate that says, "Thou shalt not." And priests in their gowns are walking their rounds, binding my desires with chains and their briars. Something I can't quite do it justice. But there's a sense of the rules that say no, of the fear, of the isolation. Venus warm, Saturn cold. Again, they're opposites. Every planetary pair can create a sense of what's similar, what's opposite. Venus square Saturn doesn't necessarily feel good unless we understand the deeper lesson is immediate gratification has to acquiesce to long-term pleasure. Got it? Ego don't like that shit. Ego says, I like this, I want it now. Saturn says, no, you have to work for it. And when Venus squares Saturn, often we need the rules in place. We need to understand what our boundaries are. We need to work with someone else's energy in order to come to common ground, and it may not just be running there and going there. There's that sense of delayed gratification. And that's exact on January 27th, which leads into the new moon that same day. Let me back this up a couple of hours. And that new moon there it is right there, that new moon on the 27th at 4:07 p.m. Pacific time on the 27th is a new moon in Aquarius. This is the Chinese New Year, the new moon in Aquarius, because it's futuristic. It says the new year doesn't begin until we have a new moon in the new year. And but this new moon in Sagittarius has along with it this the Venus square Saturn, and Mars is at the absolute last degree of Pisces. In fact, Mars moves into Aries just a few hours after that new moon, which means that new moon is about processing the old. Pisces is the garbage collector of the entire zodiac. Everything in Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, every sign ends up in Pisces. And then it gets mixed into the ocean. And then in Aries, something new is born. And so what happens here, that even though the spring equinox isn't until March 20th, that Mars moves into Aries just a couple of hours after the new moon, and in some way we get that initial thrust of like, wow, I'm moving forward again. And this is on January 27th, when our feelings, our emotions are squaring Saturn, saying, nope, not so fast there. There's a new moon that's a beginning of something new, so we have the taste of it, and yet at the same time, we're hot to trot. We're champing at the bit. We're in the starting gate, and we're waiting for it to open, and we're freaking out because we're just ready to go, and yet we can't yet go. Okay. All right. On the 29th, we have Mercury catches up with Pluto. I talked about this briefly before because as Mercury, let's go back here to day at a time. Because when Mercury catches up with Pluto, it will, over the next couple of days, do the same thing that the new moon did, that the sun did earlier. And now Mercury will conjunct Pluto and square Uranus and square Jupiter. And so we're looking now at January 29th. January 30th, it squares Uranus, and February 1st, which I'm prohibited from talking about because it's not this month. Kidding. But Mercury will square Jupiter on February 1st, 2nd, which will reactivate all the stuff that is being activated now by the sun's conjunction to Pluto and square to Uranus and square to Jupiter. And once again, we'll get all this political, social, cultural stuff that will be in our faces once more. I know I said in passing, I just want to reiterate that Mercury, which turned direct on the 19th of December, turns direct on January 8th. And although many people make a big deal out of Mercury turning direct, oh, everything's cool, I'm going, like a pendulum that swings back and forth, it goes slowest when it's going to change direction, and just after it's changed direction, it picks up speed, and then it slows down, stops, slowly moves the other way, and then picks up speed. Which means that for the first few days after the Mercury direct on January 8th, we may not see as much forward movement as we would like. And because Mercury has retrograded over territory that it's already been through, that when it begins moving forward or direct again, it's moving through the same territory for the third time. And it doesn't move into new territory. The technical word for this is its shadow. Mercury doesn't move out of its shadow until January 28th. So even though January has a lot of forward movement intellectually, mentally, it may be that it's still covering or recovering, because as many of you know, that almost every word that begins with re works well with retrogrades, whether it's reconsidering, reviewing, reassessing, did I say reconsidering? Reconsidering again, rethinking, reevaluating, reiterating again, reiterating again. Anyone else? Rehashing. Rebranding. Relaunching. Revoting. Whatever. All right. But the point is that January, although we're moving into new territory, still has that Mercury direct for most of the month, but moving through territory he's already been through. And so things may not move as fast as we would like them to. We've covered a lot of ground tonight, and thank you for your patience. The general stuff of next year, I think, is important as we move into a new year and as we move into such a shift, regardless of what your individual personal politics are. Mine are freedom and love. But regardless of what yours are, one cannot disavow the fact that things have changed or things are in the process of change. And where it goes, no one could have written it this way, and I don't think any of us, as I would say to a client, if you talk to any astrologer or any soothsayer who says that he or she knows what's going on, run. Because he or she don't. And I don't know. I can look at this and see the lay of the land energetically, but how it plays out, we can always look retrospectively, and even then sometimes we don't know. So continue to attend to your personal stuff. Keep an eye to the bigger pieces and check oneself. Check yourselves. I include myself in that. Check yourself when you go quick to judgment of someone being wrong or stupid or not getting it. And again, I don't care which side of any equation you're on. The fact of the matter is we either all get off together or none of us gets off at all. Thank you all, and have a happy as you can, New Year's Eve, New Year. Remember, I will not be here at Soul Food the end of January, but my presence somehow will magically be here through internet magic. And I will see you all again the last Wednesday of February. Thank you.